You ever look at someone you love and suddenly realize they've been living a whole other life right next to you? That was me. Sitting across the table from my husband, the man I thought I knew, while my entire world was burning quietly behind his smile. He told me I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust him. But he didn't know. I'd already seen everything. Hi. I'm Eleanor. And this is the story of how I found out the man I married had been lying for years. And how I made sure he lost everything, without even realizing it was me who pulled the strings. Before I start, tell me where you're watching from. I love reading your comments. And if you like stories about truth, betrayal, and karma, make sure to subscribe. Because this one changes everything. We met in college. I was 22, studying literature. And he, David, was in business school. He had that kind of confidence that fills a room. He made everyone feel seen. But when he looked at me, it felt different. He listened. Or maybe he just pretended really well. He told me he loved my quietness, that I balanced him out. I didn't know then that people who love your calm sometimes only love it because it makes their noise sound better. We got married 3 years later. Small ceremony, close friends, my mom crying in the front row. It felt like a beginning. And for a long time, it was good. Simple, peaceful, happy in that average American dream kind of way. But happiness, real happiness, is fragile. You don't realize how much you've built on trust, until one small crack begins to echo through everything. The first crack came one Sunday morning. He left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. Nothing suspicious, just work emails, or so I thought. Then I saw it. A message. Not explicit. Not obvious. Just enough to sting. Can't stop thinking about last night. And his reply. Me neither. My first instinct was denial. I told myself maybe it was a client, a misunderstanding, a joke. That's what good wives do, right? We explain away the pain. But something inside me shifted that day. I started watching him differently. The way his eyes lingered on his phone. How he smiled at messages he wouldn't show me. The late night showers. The cologne he never used to wear. I wanted to ask. God, I wanted to scream. But instead, I stayed quiet. Because silence, when used right, can be the sharpest weapon of all. After that day, something inside me went cold. Not angry. Not broken. Just cold. Like my body knew the truth long before my mind was ready to accept it. David was careful. Smart. Too smart, maybe. He knew how to delete messages, clear calls, smile at me like nothing was wrong. But people who lie always leave fingerprints. Little invisible marks they don't notice because they think you're too naive to look. I started paying attention to the small things. The way he turned his phone upside down when he set it on the table. How he suddenly started wearing new shirts I hadn't bought. How he came home smelling like a perfume that wasn't mine, soft, floral, too young for me. Once, I asked him jokingly if he had a new office crush. He laughed, leaned in, and kissed my forehead. He said, "Eleanor, you always make up stories in your head." And then he walked away, still smiling. That smile haunted me. Because behind it, I saw guilt. And arrogance. Like he believed I'd never be brave enough to find out the truth. Weeks passed. His distance grew. And every night, I'd lie awake next to him, feeling the emptiness between us stretch wider. He slept peacefully. I didn't. One night, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I'd ignore it. But that night, I didn't. The screen lit up with a name, R. No last name. Just a single letter. A text appeared. I miss you. When can I see you again? My heart stopped. I stared at the words until the screen went dark. And then I quietly put the phone back exactly where it was. He came out of the shower, towel around his waist, smiling like nothing had happened. He looked at me and said, "What's wrong?" I smiled back and said, "Nothing. I'm fine." And that's when I decided I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. Confrontation gives liars control. They cry, they twist, they make you doubt yourself. I wasn't going to give him that chance. Instead, I started planning. I began keeping notes, small things, times, places, phone habits. He always said he had late client meetings on Thursdays. So I started paying attention to his schedule. Sometimes he'd come home with a fresh coffee cup from a cafe across town. Sometimes with a new receipt in his pocket from a place I'd never been. I drove there one Thursday. Just to see. It was a small restaurant, cozy, candlelight, romantic. Not the kind of place you take clients. I waited in my car for almost an hour. And then he arrived. Not alone. A woman stepped out of his car. She was younger, probably mid-20s. Pretty. Soft curls, perfect makeup. She laughed as he opened the door for her. He looked at her the same way he used to look at me. That was the moment my world didn't break, it froze. Everything inside me went quiet. No crying. No rage. Just a cold, steady realization. He wasn't mine anymore. Maybe he never really was. I didn't confront him that night either. I went home before he noticed me. I cooked dinner. I set the table. I smiled when he came home and said, "You're early." He kissed my cheek and said, "I missed you." That's the thing about betrayal, sometimes, it's so deep that it becomes theater. And I had just joined the play. Over the next few weeks, I acted my part perfectly. I made him breakfast. I laughed at his jokes. I even asked about his clients. And every time he lied, I memorized the way his mouth moved, the words he used, the stories he built. He thought I was blind. But I was watching everything. I found out her name through a forgotten email draft he left open one morning. Rachel. She worked at another branch of his company. Single. New in town. He had told her he was divorced. That detail broke me. Not because he lied to her, but because he'd already started erasing me from his story. Like I was just a footnote he didn't need anymore. That night, I went into our backyard, sat under the porch light, and wrote down every single thing I knew. Dates. Locations. Names. Proof. And as I wrote, a strange calmness filled me. Because for the first time, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the witness. And the witness always decides how the story ends. When you finally see someone's true face, it doesn't shock you. It just fits. Like all the pieces suddenly fall into place, and you wonder how you didn't see it sooner. After I learned her name, Rachel, everything made sense. The random business trips. The perfume that wasn't mine. The sudden mood swings, the smiles that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't a bad liar. He was just a confident one. And confidence makes people careless. He started leaving his laptop open, sometimes even his work emails logged in. So, I watched. Not every day, not obsessively, just enough. Enough to understand the rhythm of his deceit. They'd been seeing each other for over a year. A year. While I cooked his dinners, washed his shirts, paid bills beside him. He'd been building another life, a life where I didn't exist. He told her things about me. Little cruel things. That I was distant. That I didn't understand his ambitions. That I was too quiet, too old-fashioned. All the things he used to love about me, turned into weapons he used to justify what he was doing. It wasn't just cheating. It was rewriting history. Turning me into the villain of his new love story. I started collecting proof. Screenshots. Receipts. Hotel confirmations from his email. He never noticed, he was too sure of himself. One evening, he said he was flying to Chicago for a finance summit. He packed his suitcase, kissed me goodbye, said he'd call when he landed. I watched his car disappear down the street. And then I followed. I'd rented a car the day before. I knew exactly where he was going, not the airport, but a small lakeside cabin 2 hours away. He and Rachel had rented it for the weekend. A work retreat, apparently. When I parked down the road, I could see their laughter through the window. They cooked together. Danced to music I couldn't hear. She wore one of his shirts, my husband's shirt. It should have broken me. But it didn't. I just felt done. Done with pretending. Done with crying over someone who had already chosen his ending. I didn't knock. I didn't confront. I drove home that night with my windows down and the wind hitting my face like freedom. When he returned Sunday night, I was sitting on the couch with a book. He walked in, kissed my forehead, said, "Miss me?" And I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Always." He smiled, completely fooled. The next morning, I started phase 1 of my plan. Quiet revenge isn't about screaming, it's about patience. It's about letting someone build their own destruction while you gently hand them the bricks. David's biggest pride wasn't Rachel. It was his job. He worked for a private firm, reputation everything, confidentiality sacred. And he'd been using company funds for his business trips. Guess what I found in his receipts folder? Hotel bills under client codes that didn't exist. I made copies. Hundreds. I didn't send them anywhere yet, I just kept them safe. Because timing is everything. At home, I started acting like the perfect wife again. Cooking, smiling, even laughing at his jokes. He grew bolder, careless. He'd take calls in front of me, whispering that they were work-related. Once, I even heard her voice through the phone, soft and giggly. He didn't notice that I was listening. He didn't notice that I was recording. The more lies he told, the calmer I became. Because calmness scares liars. It confuses them. They can argue with anger, but they don't know what to do with silence. He thought I didn't care anymore. He thought he'd won. But really, he'd already lost, he just didn't know it yet. A few weeks later, his company hosted a charity gala, big, fancy, full of people who adored him. He insisted I come, said, "Everyone wants to meet the woman who keeps me grounded." I almost laughed. But I went. Rachel was there too. She didn't know who I was. When we met, she smiled, introduced herself as a friend from work. Her hand trembled slightly when we shook. She knew something was off, but she didn't dare ask. David spent the night talking to investors, laughing loudly, pretending his life was perfect. And I watched from the corner of the room, holding my glass of champagne, memorizing the way he looked when he thought he was untouchable. Because soon, he wouldn't be. He taught me once that people believe the story that sounds the most like the truth. So I wrote him a new one. A story where everything he had built would look like it had been built on sand. I started small. A misplaced receipt here. A copied email thread there. I didn't forge anything. I didn't have to. Liars leave real traces. I rearranged them. I made patterns out of casual crumbs. At work, he was a golden boy. He loved the warm pats on the back. The cocktail conversations. The sense that his name opened doors. Reputation is a fragile currency, more fragile than money. And once it cracks, nothing glues it back. I waited until a Tuesday. He liked Tuesdays. He always did the reports then. He thought no one watched him because everyone expected excellence. I sent a carefully worded anonymous tip to the compliance office at his firm. Not a dramatic accusation. Just a polite note, inconsistent client billing, possible misuse of funds. Please review. I attached photocopies of the hotel receipts, the client codes that didn't exist, the hotel names that matched the little lakeside cabin. I didn't include my name. I gave them just enough to begin an audit. I watched from the kitchen window while they called him into the conference room. He wore his confidence like armor. He smiled at whoever met his eyes. He answered questions with charm. He explained away numbers the way people explain away affairs, with small believable lies. The auditors left with polite nods. They wanted paper trails. Paper moves slower than gossip. 2 weeks later, a quieter knock came. HR. A formal meeting. A request to bring in documentation for expense reports. I put a cup of coffee in his hand and said nothing. He kissed me on the cheek and left. While he was gone, I cleared his office of the things he might try to use as defenses. I copied invoices, reserved copies of his calendar, saved his emails. I kept everything on a thumb drive hidden in the book I used to grade papers with. Every piece of evidence I'd collected since the night I found his text. Every call recording. Every hotel confirmation. I labeled them plainly on the drive, for audit. He came home that night different. Not angry exactly. Uneasy. He chewed his food slower. He asked casual questions about the kids, about the school schedule, as if conversation could patch a leak in a ship. He asked if I'd seen any strange emails. I said no. I made him coffee and told him I'd mailed a form for the PDA. I smiled like I'd always smiled. Patience is a weapon liars don't understand. They think speed will win. They don't know how quiet persistence carves a canyon over time. An internal review began at his firm. Quiet at first. Then wider. Name by name. Expense by expense. The finance world is merciless. Mistakes become headlines if you let them. Meanwhile, I turned to Rachel. I could have called her. I didn't. I could have screamed and stormed. Instead, I became a ghost in their periphery. I made sure Rachel saw me at places she might notice. The grocery store on a Wednesday. The school pickup. A friendly wave in the cul-de-sac. She was polite but careful, like someone walking a tightrope over a hole she didn't realize was under her feet. She messaged him more that winter. Short texts. Miss you, can't wait. He replied with promises. He believed his own promises. Confidence makes you sloppy. I put out small social bait. A dinner invite with my name clearly on the RSVP list to a small charity event. An Instagram comment left visible where she might notice. So glad you'll meet my husband at the gala, I wrote. Innocent words. Strategic placement. When she responded with a smiley and a can't wait, I saved the screenshot. You learn quickly what people reveal when they try to hide. Their pride becomes their undoing. He started slipping. A return flight booked under his name. A careless calendar entry. A charge in a business card ledger that didn't match the client name. The audit found patterns. The auditors asked the firm for meetings. The firm called him in. He was asked to step aside from a major client presentation until matters were resolved. His assistant told me later she'd seen his face when they said it. It looked like a man watching his future evaporate slowly. He called me after the meeting and said, "It's nothing. They'll sort it out." His voice trembled on the last word. I could have exposed him to the world with a viral post. I could have told everyone at the gala, right there, in front of investors and colleagues. But the kind of revenge I wanted wasn't noise. It was erosion. Public spectacle feeds sympathy for the accused. Quiet collapse leaves no place to hide. I started reaching out to people who mattered. Former clients. People he'd wronged in small ways. I didn't tell them my motives. I simply asked questions. Did you ever have billing issues with our firm? Do you recall any double billing? Then I waited. People remember when their accounts look strange. They remember when they've been overcharged. Checks get pulled. Invoices get questioned. $1 here, a confused client there. Small financial doubt turns into an investigation if you place it right. At home, I staged the perfect normal. Family dinners. Weekend soccer games. I volunteered at the school. It's amazing how much cover a PTA badge gives you. People assumed I was a woman with things to do. No one connected the calm face at bake sale duty with the woman quietly collapsing a man's world. No one wanted to. David became erratic in private. He drank more. He stopped bringing work home because work had become a mirror reflecting his sloppiness. He argued with himself in the garage while I listened from the doorway. I heard him say, "I didn't do anything that bad." I heard him bargain to himself in the dark. People can accept many things, but not the idea of being small. He was clinging to image like oxygen. His firm issued a freeze on his accounts pending review. His name was removed from the client list. The investors murmured. The company prepared a statement that emphasized temporary administrative leave. Language matters. Euphemisms soften the blow. But the whisper traveled through networks like a slow poison. I didn't celebrate when the first article hit the industry newsletter. I didn't dance. I felt tired. Because revenge you plan is not satisfying in the way you imagine. It's clinical. It's like watching weather patterns shift. I'd traded my heartbreak for a job I'd never wanted, architect of ruin. I knew the cost. He called me, voice raw. Eleanor, I swear I can fix this. I can explain. I said, tell them everything. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I guided him toward his own unraveling with the softest possible push. Men like him are used to being the narrator of their own story. I removed his pen. At the same time, I tightened the social screws. I reached out to people who used to admire him. A former mentor. A college friend now on a board. I didn't spread gossip. I asked for their insight, their memory of his decisions, the way finances were handled. I let their doubts grow organically. If they wanted to be his friend, they'd ask. If they wanted distance, the evidence I'd arranged made it easier to step away. Both were fine. He started to lose clients. Small at first. Confidential calls that stopped returning. A major investor scheduled a meeting and then canceled. The firm's PR drafted a calm statement about ongoing reviews. The board moved meetings up. They were not kind to uncertainty. One day he came home and stood in the doorway like a man learning a new language. He didn't know how to speak. Eleanor, he said, what did you do? I looked at him. I had already done everything I would do. I said, I did what I had to. He searched my face for anger and found only quiet. How do you punish someone with quiet? With the refusal to be ruled by emotion. With the refusal to be baited. With the cold structure of inevitability. He hired lawyers. He lied in front of them. He begged. He tried to make me the unstable wife whose jealousy had driven a smear campaign. He used his charm on the lawyers the way he used it everywhere else. But facts are stubborn. Receipts are stubborn. Emails are stubborn. Men who depend on story over substance eventually find their stories contradicted by paper. The board called an emergency meeting. The firm announced reassignment of his responsibilities. Investors sold small shares. The press started to write with more cautious language. There was no single moment of theatrical downfall. There was a slide. A decrescendo. I remember him sitting at our kitchen table that night, hands shaking, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He asked me if I'd ever loved him. He asked if there was a chance. I could have told him everything. Torn him open and watched the shame consume him. I could have gleefully narrated his defeat. Instead I said, I loved what I thought you were. That's different. He made a sound like a breaking thing. The phone calls got fewer. The friends who'd laughed at our dinner parties stopped answering. The invites dried up. He went to work and felt the absence of applause. He went to sleep and heard the hollow echo of his own choices. He still had a life. He still had breathing. But the comfortable armor of his public kindness had rusted away. I did not gloat. I did not dance. Revenge, I learned, leaves ash. It leaves a quiet house that used to be noisy with laughter. It leaves two people, both wrecked in different ways. Towards the end of that phase, he called late. His voice was small. Eleanor, he said, can we talk in the morning? I agreed. I hung up the phone and walked to our bedroom. I took out the book with the thumb drive and opened it. I looked at the files I'd taken months to collect. Proof. Evidence. A map. I placed the drive in a drawer and closed it. The plan was not over. The best part of destruction is that it's self-propelled. Once you remove the scaffolding, the building collapses the rest of the way. I had handed him the bricks. Now I would watch as he stacked them. I slept that night better than I had in months. Not because I felt victorious. Because the tension of waiting, the most corrosive, anxious thing I'd lived with, loosened. A new kind of quiet settled around me. It wasn't peace. It was the calm before the final work. The end was coming. Not loud. Not dramatic. Quiet. And that suited me just fine. The day it all became real, David didn't scream. He didn't shout. He didn't even beg. He just sat in the office conference room, staring at the emails, the receipts, the calendars, the screenshots, the quiet evidence of every betrayal he had ever hidden. The board had called a meeting. They weren't angry. They weren't dramatic. They were efficient. Their words were calm, but each one hit like a hammer. Mismanaged funds. Unauthorized travel. Conflicts of interest. Breaches of trust. He had prepared for audits. He had charm. He had excuses. But I had prepared too. And I didn't leave gaps. He looked around the room, eyes wide, searching faces for sympathy, for help, for any lifeline. None came. Colleagues who once smiled at his arrival now shifted in their seats, keeping distance. Investors whispered quietly in corners. The firm's PR had prepared statements that left no room for defense. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. My revenge was never about the public spectacle. It was about letting him collapse under the weight of his own lies. By the time he returned home that evening, his aura of invincibility had vanished. He avoided my gaze, clutching a briefcase that suddenly felt heavy. He muttered something about lawyers, settlements, damage control. I nodded politely and asked about dinner. He mumbled that he wasn't hungry. Over the next few weeks, his world continued to shrink. Clients left. They refused to trust someone who could mismanage funds and lie effortlessly. Colleagues avoided him. Social invitations stopped coming. Even the neighborhood knew something was wrong, whispered words drifting through the cul-de-sac like smoke. He tried to reach Rachel. She had grown distant. She hadn't realized the walls of deceit were collapsing around them both. She wanted no part in the fallout. He called me once, late at night, voice trembling. "Eleanor, I can fix this. Please, just help me." I looked at him and said, calmly, "I loved who I thought you were. You aren't that man anymore." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply walked away. For weeks, I watched from a distance. He attended meetings. He drove through our streets. He showed up at dinner parties he hadn't been invited to. Everywhere, the careful world he'd built was gone. Reputation, pride, control, evaporated. All he had left was his own reflection and the consequences of his choices. I never interfered further. Karma, slow and deliberate, was enough. And me? I changed too. I took weekends with my daughters. I painted the living room a color I'd always wanted. I drove on roads I'd avoided. I signed up for a writing class and wrote letters I'd never sent, letters to my younger self, to the girl who trusted too much, to the woman who finally learned to see clearly. The quiet satisfaction wasn't about his pain. It was about my release. Sometimes, I think of him. Alone in the house he once filled with lies. The friends he once impressed now distant. The woman he thought he could escape with gone from his life. I imagine him looking at his hands and realizing they built nothing but a cage for himself. That's enough. And for me, the quiet end of his world was the loudest sound of all. If you've ever been betrayed, let me tell you this. You don't have to yell. You don't have to confront. The truth, handled with patience and precision, destroys more than anger ever could. So, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to watch someone lose everything without a word? Like, share, and subscribe if you believe in quiet justice, patience, and the dark satisfaction of karma done right. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud, it's inevitable.